production feedback on those things right now. The schedule for 2016 rollout is still projected to be first quarter of 2016, although I'd say January isn't, January is not good. We're not going to see a January release. We're looking at February or a March release of 2016. And historically, you know, when we've completed that internal build for Civil 3D, it's not much longer for us to turn around and get our external package ready for release as well. So there may be a little bit of lag there. There has been in past rollouts, but it's usually not that long. The other item I'd like to mention today during the update, just briefly while we have a few minutes, is our design model sharing program. We have a program in place right now. It's not a standard process for sharing design models on projects because we're really just still, you know, even though the requirements for delivering design models are in place starting in July 2014, it's really only affecting new design projects starting up after that implementation date. So the projects that started before July 2014 are exempt from those requirements. But we do have a program in place for project staff to voluntarily share design model information. We have, you know, special provision notifications to contractors, and we have procedure in place to help you. We'll review your models for you, provide comments on them, and then to help you prepare that final package and to get it out there at time of project advertisement. We're entertaining both DOT designed projects and consultant designed projects in this program. And it's, even though it's on a voluntary basis right now, I think it's beneficial for people to be getting that experience to go through right now while we have the capacity, because we don't have a lot of projects in the program, to get a direct model review from methods development and to get suggestions on how that model could be constructed a little bit differently within your design data can be really helpful. So if you're curious about learning more about the model sharing program, contact myself, Brad Hollister, or Steve Popke. The two of us are partnering together to manage that program. And either one of us, if you can get a hold of us by email, we can share details with you. And if you're wondering when would be the correct time to contact us about a project, I'd say anytime after 60% complete. So if you've done that 60% plan set and you're wondering if your design project is in good position to deliver good solid models, we feel by 60% there's just enough structure within the design project to really get a good look at where the model development is heading. So anytime 60% and beyond, if you want to contact us, you know, we can start coordinating on some of those reviews and stuff like that. And then definitely, you know, what we would be looking at for getting the models out, sometime between PS&E and project advertisement, we'd need that final model package pulled together. So we want to do the review before then to give you enough time to adjust any comments and feedback that we might provide. Steve Popke, Brad Hollister for the Model Share program, and that's all I have for you today. So Brian, if you're ready, I'm turning things over to you.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to WISTA and ACEC for letting me present today. Always a pleasure to come and do this. Today's presentation is going to be on cross sections and earthwork in Civil 3D. Myself, just a few things about myself. I work for CTC out of Minneapolis. As Brad had mentioned, we're a consultant to civil engineering firms, surveying firms. We work with WISTA clients, all sorts of firms in the region, as well as cities and counties and the DOT. I've been a consultant to firms for about 5 years doing this now. And before that, my background, I worked for about 10 years in the industry as a design engineer and also as a survey doing construction staking, topo surveying, as well as inspection. So if you have any questions about CTC or anything, feel free to contact me afterwards. I'll throw my contact information up here after the end of the presentation. So Civil 3D cross-sections in earthwork, not the most exciting, glamorous part of it, but it's really where kind of the work you put into your surfaces in your corridor really kind of comes to fruition. And so I want to talk about a few tips and tricks, a few processes that can help you perhaps do this a little better, or maybe just give you some confirmation that the way you are doing it is kind of a good way to be going about it. So some of the things we're going to go through. First, we're going to be talking about cross-sections. We're actually going to spend a little more time on cross-sections than earthwork, just because there's a lot of display considerations with labeling and so forth. So we're going to start with creating some section views and some sheets, and then we're going to address how do you add additional sections after you've made your sheets. It's kind of a clumsy thing in Civil 3D. We'll look at the best way to address that. And then we'll also look at adding more content to your cross-section. So and I'll cover a couple options of how you might handle that. And then finally, we'll look at editing of labels in your cross-sections. Many times they come in and you might be 80–90% there, but there's those few labels that are overlapping, or they don't quite look right. And there's a number of approaches on how to handle that. I'm going to go through 3 of them. And they all kind of have their place. And what we're always going to attempt to do is to try to make the kind of the most simplest global change across the whole thing. We don't want to get ourselves into a place where we edit cross-section by cross-section. If there's a change that has to happen to all of them, we want to make that change in a place where it automatically pushes to all those sections. So then we'll talk a little bit about earthwork. We're going to look at making a separate sample line group for that, and defining our material lists, and then generating a couple of the report options that are available from the WISDOC package. So let me jump into Civil 3D and just explain the setup we have. I've got 3 drawings here, and by the way, this data set, all these drawings, everything will be available to you guys. It'll be uploaded. You can use it after the fact if you desire. We've got 3 drawings set up here. I've got an alignments and profiles drawing. I've got a corridor drawing, and I've got a corridor built in here already. And then I also have my cross-sections drawing. So I'm skipping over some of the kind of setup procedures, some of the most basic things like creating of sample lines, just X-referencing in the corridor into your sections drawing, those sort of things, because I want to get right to kind of the juicy stuff. So starting out, let's go ahead and make some sections. And if we look here, the yellow lines, these are my sample lines that I've created. And just for this example, for this presentation, I've got them at a 100-foot interval. And I also, in the intersection area, have a couple sample lines there, and then I have a match line as well. And so those sample lines are adjusted to tie into that match line. Now these are my sample lines for cross-sections. Like I said, we'll make another sample line group for earthwork, and in that case we'll have more sample lines. It'll be a separate sample line group. So let's jump right into it. Let's pick our sample line and let's go and make multiple section views. I'm going to launch this. I get this wizard, and I get alignment, and then I get a sample line group to choose from. As I said, I have 2 of them made. We're going to start with the cross-sections one. And then right down here is my section view style. I'm going to stick with the 1-inch and 10-foot horizontal section view style. And many times you may not know exactly what's going to work for your project depending on how wide it is, what kind of relief, elevation relief you have. So oftentimes you might kind of take a guess at it, and you might go through this wizard a couple times until you get things kind of set up the way you want. That said, it's not that you have to get it just perfect the first time you go through this. There are options after the fact to compensate for it. Second page here, I've got a set of production or draft cross-sections. I'm going to make a production one, which means I want them to be organized to be placed into section sheets. And if I click this little browse button, it's going to default to the WISDOC cross-section template. And this is going to reference a layout tab in there set to this scale. So one of the things we want to be careful of I want to make sure the layout I grab in here is the same as the section view style I selected on this first page. I also have a group plot style in here. Among other things, at this point, this is basically how the sections are going to organize. Are they going to go from bottom up or top down? And we're going to pick the bottom up option. We'll get back to that group plot style. It controls some other things with the layout of our sections, and we'll see that in just a bit. I'm going to stick with the offset range here, which is coming from the sample lines themselves. And I'm going to stick with an elevation range that's automatic, and that's based on the data that we're sampling. Finally, if we look at the sources that are in my sample line group, I have the existing ground and I have the corridor. And the styles I have assigned, I have existing ground surface style and my cross sections with links code set style. We'll talk a little bit more about code set styles when we get into detailed editing of the cross sections. And finally, I'm going to go and create my section views, and I'm going to place these over here. And right off the bat, you're going to notice, wow, that's a lot of sections, right? A lot of tiny sections on one sheet. So this scale down here, you notice I'd switched this to 1 to 40, but we chose 1 to 10 layouts. So when you create these, it's okay to have the scale wrong at the beginning, but before you make your sheets, you have to make sure you're at the scale that the sheets are supposed to be at. So if I go ahead and adjust this, my sheet layout will adjust, and then I can come in here, I can grab a section view, any one of them really, and I can run update section view layout. And then it'll kind of readjust, reposition everything. So we don't need to delete them and then kind of go back and run through everything again. So long as we have this looking correctly before we made our sheets, we'll be okay. So a couple things right off the bat. We don't want to have more sheets than we need. Right now I have 6 sheets that will be generated. But if I look at this, I might be able to get maybe a 4th section in there, 4th cross section. This is controlled by the group plot style. That was that one where we decided it would go from bottom up, my sections. That also controls things like spacing. So right here, if I pick on the grid, this is a section sheet object, and it's a style called a group plot style that controls how this behaves. So a couple things about this. First, what's the green outline? That's the size of my page setup when I actually go and create sheets. What's the yellow outline? That's coming from the viewport that's in that section sheet that I referenced. So when I went through that wizard and I said, go grab the 1 by 10 section sheet, that referenced a layout tab down here. And in there was a viewport at a given scale and a page setup of a given definition. So how do we adjust this? We need to be able to kind of fudge this and maximize the number of sections we can get on there. Well, if I pick on this sheet object, I can go to Edit Group Plot Style. And most of the styles in the templates, they just kind of come in and you change styles, you select different ones, but you don't go into editing the style that much. The group plot style is an exception to that. Sometimes you want to be able to come in here and modify some of these things. Now we're not in a situation where we can get 2 columns, but we might be able to get 4 sections in there. So if I come to the Array tab in the group plot style, it's kind of handy. I click in these different fields and it highlights it over here as I put my cursor over it. This is the spacing between the rows. Right now it's at 1 inch, but I actually have a lot of space in there. So you can kind of play with this value a little bit. What if I put it to 0.8? Still doesn't fit 4 sections in there. What if I go down to 0.5? Okay. Now there's less space between those sections. So depending on what you have in your sections, you can increase that spacing or decrease it to minimize the number of sheets you have. And now we're down to 5 sheets. So that's some basics of creating your sections. Let's move forward and make our sheets, and let's put ourselves in a position where the sheets are all made and then we've decided I need another section and it's somewhere in the middle of the road. And how do we handle that? So to make our sheets, I go and pick the section view. I can pick the section sheet, and I get Create Section Sheets up here. Go ahead and pick that in this contextual ribbon. And it's not a wizard, it's just a single page here. There's my alignment, my sample line group, and then my section view group, that's in there as well. And what this automatically does is it creates a bunch of layouts for me and it places them in a sheet set. So I can give this a name for my project, and I can decide where this sheet set will go. Now I don't have the entire project, WSDOT project structure here, but I'm just going to place it amongst my other drawings here. It's always going to prompt me, you need to save your drawing if you didn't do it right before you ran the wizard. So I'll hit OK. And now this will churn out all the sheets based on what I've set up on here. So it's basically taking these green boxes and making viewports that look at these areas right here. And you'll see it down here. I've got all these sections that show up in here now. And it also created a sheet set, and in there are my 5 sheets. So we can take a peek at one of those, and there they are with the plot style applied, so you can see what it'll print like. Now, what if we've gone this far and we've done manipulation of the sheets and everything? We've got a lot of time into it. It's down the road, and we've got to add another section, another couple sections. Well, to get another section, we need another sample line, right? Well, that's easy enough. We can make another sample line. But I can't just take a section and squeeze it in the middle of all the other ones and have everything kind of pushed down. It works the opposite way. I can go delete a sample line and the sections will adjust accordingly, but it doesn't work when you're trying to add one. So let's go back to model view. And let's take a look at this. Let's say we want to add another sample line in the middle here. So I can go right to sample lines. I'm going to make them along my Highway 8 alignment. And I need to make sure I grab the right sample line group. As I mentioned before, I have 2 of them in here, so I'm going to grab the cross sections one. And I just want to manually add a sample line in here. And it's defaulting to 75-foot widths. So I can come in here and I can adjust this, whatever I need, adjust this sample line here. Okay, so there's the new one. Problem is we can't just spit out that section. So the process we have to go through is to delete our section views. It doesn't mean delete our sheets, but delete our section views. But here's the thing, right now our section sheets, they're all set up, the viewports are set up to look in these exact areas that I've placed all these section views. So if I'm going to delete all these, I need to make sure that I put the new ones back in the exact same spot. So you need to give yourself some kind of little piece of geometry. When I inserted these, I clicked at this location right down here. So before I delete this stuff, I can give myself a little pointer right there. Draw a rectangle box or something like that so that you know where to put your sections back in. Now when it comes to deleting these, we don't want to just pick them on the screen. We want to go into our prospector. We want to go into alignments. We want to dig way down. You guys have ever tried to find your section view group in your alignments, you got to go about 6-7 levels down. There's my sample lines, section view groups way down there. That's my whole group of sections. You always want to do this from here. You get problems with the sources that are added to your sample line group if you don't do it this way. Okay. So that little line is holding my place right there. Now I just go through the process again. Create multiple section views. And I should remember all my previous settings. The same template, the same group plot style, and the same settings all the way around. And then it's prompting me select the section view origin. That's the bottom left corner of the first section sheet. So I want to snap right there. And they come right back in the same spot. And so as I said, these sheets that we already defined, these layouts, they're going to find the new section views I put right there. So certainly there might be some loss of work when you have to do that. Depends on what you've done in your sections. But when it comes to cross sections, we want to always try to do editing and things that minimize the amount of manual work you've done there, so that a process as drastic as deleting all your section views doesn't cost you hours or days of work. All right, let's look at adding some utilities or right-of-way labels in there. Right now I've got my existing ground and I've got my corridor showing up in here. And we want to look at adding right-of-way, perhaps a utility in there. And there's a couple ways we can do this. If I come over here, notice the cyan lines. These are my right-of-way lines. And these are alignments that are actually residing, the source of them is in my alignments and profiles drawing. So I have this alignment in here. It's then a data shortcut into my cross-section drawing. The other thing I have with that alignment in the source is I have a surface profile cut from the existing ground. So when you have those two things, we can tell this alignment to create a label along the existing ground profile in the sections. So I'll show you this way, and then we're also going to look at another option where we do it using a feature line. So I'm going to go pick on one of my section views, and what we're after is getting to section view group properties. Often a point of confusion, section view properties or group properties. We want to do the group. We want to do it to all the sections at once. So go to the group properties. And what we have in here are a number of options on this section views tab. And what we're after is the profile grade. I click the ellipsis button here. And what I can do is now I can project alignments and profiles along my sections. So I've got those three alignments in there. Let's go and grab a couple of them. I'll grab the right-of-way ultimate 2. I'll add that. Notice the profile that's showing up here. That's that existing surface profile. So that knows what elevation to set the label at. Then a marker style I pick in here. Marker styles are just a very general style used all across Civil 3D. One of their applications is how you label or symbolize different utilities or objects in your sections. And so that's why there's a large list of them in here. And they're sorted well. We should be able to go and find our cross-section right-of-way. Okay. So that was the right-of-way 2. Let's also grab right-of-way 3 and assign the same marker style. So these were the two on the south end. I'm going to do the north end one a little bit differently. I'm going to use a feature line for that option. So I hit OK, brings me back to my section view group properties. And now my right-of-way labels show up. Okay, so they appear to be like part of the section view itself. So not the corridor or the surface section, they're part of the section view. So they're all locked in there and projected to every single section view. So this is what you always want to think about when you're doing sections. Don't draw things manually in there. Try not to do anything manual in there. Go back to the source. Make edits there, create objects there, and then push that stuff to many sections at once. If you find yourself doing a lot of manual editing section by section, stop yourself and say, there's a better way here. And 95% of the time there is a better way. And you just got to figure out what it is. So it's checking out this video or some of the videos online with the WISTAT training and so forth. So we get a right-of-way label in there. Let's look at this one over here. This is an alignment. I'm going to do this a slightly different way. I'm going to create a feature line from this alignment. And in here we have create feature lines from alignment. So whether your source was an alignment and then you made the feature line, or you only had the feature line, a lot of different options here. And I just want to show you guys multiple ways. So I can pick this alignment, and I get create feature line from alignment. So a feature line is a 3D line, and it's going to follow the horizontal path of the alignment and the vertical path of the surface profile. And we don't want to weed points because we want that to go up and down with all the little nuances of the existing ground. The style is the proposed right-of-way. And then all the way down here, create a dynamic link to the alignment. It's going to follow that alignment. So if there was a change to the right-of-way, the feature line would move with it. I hit OK. And now we see that heavy red line. That's just the feature line style that's applied there. And what we can do now is we can take this and project this to our cross sections. And when we do that, it's gonna look in the whole drawing. It's gonna look for the whole drawing and where are there feature lines. And I've got another one drawn in here. And just to save some time, I already placed it in here. And this is a feature line that's a gas line. Okay, so it's an existing gas line. It pulled grades from the existing surface, and then it was lowered an assumed amount of 3 feet or 4 feet, some kind of assumed amount like that. Okay, when we run the command to project all these objects to the section views, it's going to grab every feature line that's available in that area. If you have feature lines you don't want to project, you have to freeze them. Freeze that layer, and then they won't project to the section view. So, but I have 2 in here. They're both visible, so they're both going to project at the same time. And the way we do this is you go pick on a section view, and it's kind of hidden. Go up to the contextual ribbon, and then here you have project objects to multiple section views. This is the more powerful one. You have project objects to view, but if you can, try to use this one because it'll grab every feature line you want, push it to every section view at the same time. Again, we don't want to do section by section type work. So project objects to multiple section views. And we get this seemingly kind of daunting dialog box at first. And if we take a look down here, let's go down to the list right here. This will scan my entire drawing, look for all this stuff, and project it to sections. Well, what I'm interested in is just the feature lines. That being said, blocks, Kogo points, all that stuff could project, and the settings up here dictate how that stuff would project if it was in between a section, for example, if it was a point or a block. But we're just doing feature lines. So the style, it's going to be set to use object. We have feature line styles applied to those feature lines already. Elevation object options, use object. We already have the grades there. And then label style. I don't want a label style on this. In fact, this little symbol that showed up over here, this red line with the little RW on it, that's a marker style. And that's the same one that's already embedded in our feature line style. So we don't even need to select it. It's been set up in the template to use that marker style for right-of-way. So when you're projecting feature lines, it automatically knows. I'll show you that once we finish this command here. So then we see it on the left side. We get right-of-way showing up as well. And the object will be slightly different. It's going to appear the same because it's using the same marker style, but this is actually a feature line projection, whereas over here, this is an alignment that's added to the profile view. So when I pick on this, this references the main feature line over in plan view. We just take a peek at it, and we look at the style, edit feature line style. In here is the section tab. This is that same marker style that we selected when we projected the alignment. This is embedded inside the feature line style itself, so it knows to use that marker style. Most of the stuff's set up and ready to go. So if you want to know the magic behind the curtains. So, and then the other thing is we had this feature line down here. Okay, that has a gas feature line style applied to it. That's on my right side. If I go over here, I'll see that gas line show up. Okay, so multiple ways to do it. You might have seen in that dialog box, let's open it up again, in fact. Survey figures. Okay, if you have survey figures from a survey database that have existing utilities, for example, in it, There's a procedure nicely outlined in the WSDOT training material, but you can bring those survey figures into your section drawing and project those as well. What we want to avoid is redrawing stuff. We don't want to have to manually draw something if the data is already there. So if it's in the database and you have survey figures, use that. So I'm just touching on some of the key concepts with projecting objects. Again, in the training manual, lots of options, lots of more detail on that. So check that out if you haven't done it already. All right, let's take a look at these sections in more detail. We're going to talk about 3 types of editing. One is going to be manual label by label editing. Another one's going to be the entire section is edited, but only one section. And then finally, we'll look at global edits to the labeling so they apply to all the sections at once. So we'll start with the simplest, kind of more manual one, and then we'll build up to the more powerful options. So if I zoom into some of these labels here, let's go find a section that has maybe some labels that are a little close, a little bit overlapping. Even if I just come right here, okay, these labels are kind of overlapping a bit. There's maybe one I don't want on there, okay. If you pick on these are corridor section labels, and you pick on them and they seem like it's all one object, so how do I edit just that one? This is kind of really odd behavior here. If I right-click over just this one, I get a couple options in here. I get label properties and I get flip label. This applies to only the object I right-clicked on, not the entire set of labels, even though all of them were selected. And go to label properties. If I just want that 4 to 1 to disappear, I have label visibility, and I can set it to false. Just that one disappears. So this is like the one exception to the control selecting you do with objects. You know, another option here is I can pick this, and if I hold control, I'm holding control on right now, then I go pick this one, then it selects just that label, and then you'd think I could go right click and get label properties or flip label, but you don't. They're trying to trick us. The only reason you do the control select is when you want to go to a drag state. Okay? And most of the times you shouldn't have to do that in a section view. But that's what the control selecting is about. If I had put something in drag state like that and I then right click over it again, I'll get reset label and can put it back to the default position. So we're also looking at this one. What about this? I pick right here, I right click over it, I have flip label, and it throws it over there. Now that doesn't really make sense. A little tough to read there. Maybe I want a different style applied there. Let's go to reset label. And let's pick this again and go to label properties. And in the same place where I change label visibility, we have label style, and it says default. Well, what is default? Default is coming from the code set style. The code set style is applied to this corridor section, and it's saying all these little pieces, or codes rather, that are in my corridor, label them this way or label them that way. Let me show you what this is before we jump into this. If I pick on my corridor section and I right click, I have edit code set style. Okay. Code set styles are probably the most daunting style in Civil 3D. They have more settings in them. They have hundreds of little mini styles inside of them, and they control the display of your corridor, they control the display of your sections, and they control the display of your assemblies. And in your assemblies and sub-assemblies, you have all these things called codes, and you have it for 3 basic things. The lines in your assemblies are links, the little circles or the little X's are points, and then shaded areas to get an area of a sub-base material, perhaps. Those are called shapes. Well, if I dive into here and I look at the points, I see all these little codes. So all the sub-assemblies have all these little tags on them. So if you're using a daylight type ditch subassembly, for example, there's daylight codes in there. If you're using a curb subassembly, there's back a curb codes in there. And then all those little codes in this code set style, this code set style says what to do with it. Now you don't need to be an expert on this stuff, but you need to kind of know that that's what's controlling all this stuff. And we'll take advantage of switching entire code set style at some point, but right now we're just after switching one label, right? So I didn't look at that exact code for that label that was overlapping this one right here. And it's one of these daylight codes in here. It's no lead, 315 degrees. This is controlling, that's the default one. So when I went to those label properties and I said default, default's coming from right here. What we're after is an override on just this label. Label properties, default, and now I get a label style option. And that same one that was in here, I think it's this one right here, no leader, 315 degrees. That's the default because that's what was set in the code set style. But I'm saying I want to bring it the other way. Let's grab the 225. I think that'll work. I'll just flip it the other way. Okay. So we don't want to pick this thing. We don't want to explode it. We don't want to put a wipeout over it and a piece of M text. Okay. We want to use the tools. We want to change those things at their source. What about, I want the labeling on this entire section different than every other section. It's not just a single label. Okay. There's kind of a mid-level type of editing of your labels that can take place. If I go and pick on my section view, and this is just one section, let's just go down here, for example. And I go to section view properties. I'll go to the sections tab, and I'll see my two sources in here. It's my existing ground surface and my corridor. And over to the right here, there's a style option. And under style for my corridor, it says cross-section sheets with links. This is a code set style. If I click on it, there's code set style. I can come in here and I can make an override for just this section, and I can grab any other code set style. And the code set styles that are in here, they're going to cover a lot of what you need, but there may be certain situations where you need to make your own. It might be just for that project, the way you label things. And so let's grab this cross sections with links, and let's make a copy of this. And so now if we're getting into this, it's going to take a little more familiarity with code set styles. But let's go touch those label styles that we had adjusted for just one label. So if I go look at some of those daylight options, I'm just going to do a control select in here, and we'll adjust some of these. So all of these are set to that 315 degree, 15 degree no leader. Okay, I can control select these, and I can say make these all the 225 option, or whatever is needed. Okay, this is, if you're not real familiar with this, experiment with this stuff. See what these label styles look like, what they do. There's 3 or 4 basic groups in there, and then they're all about different rotations on the label itself. The point is I can make a separate code set style that just changes a whole set of labels. And when I'm in here and I set this as an override, now look at all my labels. They've all flipped, or some of the ones, I didn't change it for all of them, but a lot of them have flipped to that 225 degree rotation. And I did this as an override only to this section. So you might get in certain areas where there's just way too much labeling, right? Stuff like this. To be labeling every one of these links in this way doesn't make sense. This might be another case where we would do an override code set style on this. So if you're not real familiar, code set styles are your friend, definitely. Real powerful set of styles. All right, let's look at a third type of editing. What if I want to add a different set of labels to my entire set of section views? Let's say we want a unique label at the crown here. Okay. Well, there's a point code there. In fact, it's called crown. And so we could jump into our code set style and we could say assign a label to the crown point code, just like we had changed label styles assigned to other point codes. But you got to be careful about it. If I jump over to my corridor drawing and I take a look at some of the assemblies in use here, here's the main Highway 8 assembly. And this is the assembly code set style. And what's real handy about this is it's labeling all the codes for you. So you're not going to be able to memorize what all the codes are in all these sub-assemblies. And you don't need to. So come to your assemblies, make sure the code set style assigned to your assembly, it's corridor proposed, point and link codes, okay? And then this stuff will be labeled and called out. Now, what we're saying, I want to label the crown point. I just want to label the center though, but I've used multiple lanes in this section. In fact, I have a small lane subassembly right in there, and you can kind of see the WN at the top there. There's a crown point code there. So a lot of times you can't just say, well, go label crown or label something else, because it's going to show up in a lot of places. So there's a strategy when you're saying, I just want one label to show up in every section at this one place. And it's using a new subassembly. I'm going to go to my tool palettes. If I go to the generic tab, I have a mark point on here. Now this has some functionality with the link to mark point subassemblies. But the main point of it is here is just to put a single dot on our subassembly or our assembly and then put a unique code in there so that automatically the sections will pick that up and label it the way we want. So I'm going to click on mark point, and I'm going to attach this right at the center here. And automatically it calls out mark point. If I pick on that subassembly and look in the properties, you'll see the point code is mark point. Well, that's not what we're after. Let's jump back to our sections here. And I want to show you guys a nice little thing that's been added to these code set styles. If I open up this code set style, you're going to see in the point codes, lots of point codes, this whole set of codes that look like they're named the same as the label style. Now remember how these codes work. If the code is in the subassembly, this is what happens to it. It gets these styles and these label styles. Already set up in here is a bunch of codes that I can just grab, add somewhere, and then this label will be applied to it. So let me go grab, let's look at this code right here, elevation offset extension 90 degrees. I believe that one will go straight up, it'll go vertical up. I can grab this, and I'm actually going to click in here and do a copy. I did a Control-C just then. And I'm going to cancel out. I'm going to go back to that source. So again, this is the most kind of global type editing we can do. We're going to the source. What's the source of in your sections? Well, it's the corridor. What's the source of your corridor? It's the alignment and profile, and most importantly, your assemblies. So I'm back at the assembly editing the source. I can come into this mark point subassembly, and I'm doing a Control-V right now, and I'm pasting that point code. So if that code is in there, my sections code set style will now pick that up, and I'll assign that label style to it. Seems kind of odd, right? Like, why don't I just put a piece in MTeX and do a mass copy and copy all over the place? Well, what if we have to recreate section views? What if we adjust our profile? What if we don't want just floating independent objects in our section views? We want to try to do this stuff at the source. And so when I do that, that code is adjusted there. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do a copy to. I'm going to put it on my other primary assembly. Now those are inside my corridor. That code is tagged inside my corridor. I had my corridor rebuilding automatic. Not normally a good process for production, but works for a presentation. I'm going to save this corridor drawing. I'm going to come back to my cross-sections drawing. If I go to my XREFs now, I simply reload my corridor drawing, and that point code is now going to come through. So I click reload. See if we pick the right style here. Okay, lots of different styles in there. Automatically pushed a unique label to just that unique point code. Okay. And again, why didn't I assign it to Crown? Because Crown would have shown up over here as well. Would have shown up right there because we have that code as well. So use mark point when you would just want to add a unique code somewhere and get a simple little point label style to show up. So cross-section editing, it's very easy to get kind of lost in the weeds with it. Always think about those three different methods there. Is it a single label on the single section? Use the first method, which is to pick it, right-click, and I've got these options, flip label, label properties, and I can do things like turn it off, select an override label style just for that one right there. Or what if I want to change the whole set of labels for one section? Then I want an override code set style. It takes a little more knowledge, but if you get familiar with the code set styles, it can be really powerful. And then finally, what's the most global way? And this is the way you should strive to edit if you can. Go to the source, edit the assembly itself, or the subassembly. And then we get labels that push across every cross section. All right, that's most of what I wanted to cover on cross sections. Obviously a lot to it. Just want to highlight a few items on there. We've got a little more time. Let's look at some earthwork options. And first thing about earthwork is that it's calculating using sample lines. And it takes the traditional method of average end area method, and that's the preferred approach from WSDOT. There's a couple other methods in there, but it's average end area method. So it's the way some of us might have done it a number of years ago, where we calculate an area in a cross section. We perhaps even draw a polyline, and we get the area of that. And we get the area of the section next one down. It's a different area for that subbase material, and we average the two and multiply it by the length between the two. That's what's happening with sample lines when you calculate earthwork. So what if I have sample lines that are 100 feet apart when there's a lot of change happening in between that 100 feet? It starts to get pretty inaccurate. But I don't want to just add sample lines here, and then because then I'm going to make all these sections that I don't want. I mean, I can delete some of them out of there, but at some point, if the road has enough detail to it, and it's not just simply straight and everything the whole way, you've got to make a separate sample line group for your material and your earthwork quantities. And so I have one created in here just to save a little bit of time. So I'm going to go to my layers. And I'm just going to search on sample somewhere in here. Sample. Okay. Now I've got a set of earthwork sample lines. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my cross-section sample lines. So this is an entirely separate sample line group. And you'll see that show up separately in our alignments. They're both built on Highway 8 alignment. But if you go down to sample line groups, then I have cross-sections and I have earthwork. So two different purposes. And right off the bat, you'll notice I've got a tighter interval. I've got 50 feet on here. And I even have more in the intersection area. And I just threw a couple extras, but depending on the detail, you may need considerably more sample lines than this. I know some of the training videos show a whole set of, just a whole iteration of sample lines in there. The key is to think about what it's doing, right? If we look at this sample right here, it's calculating an area of all the different pieces right there. And then over here, this sample line is calculating areas at this section right here, at this stationing. And then it's taking the average between the two. Well, roughly the average is, if I threw a sample line right here. So if your transition of your materials and the geometry is fairly linear from one sample line to the next, it's going to calculate roughly, or it's going to calculate pretty well. But if this curve line was kind of curving in and out and going all over the place between one sample line, like if this sample line right here did not exist and we simply calculated between this one and this one, we would be missing all the nuances of the curve and the base material and the granular material. We would miss that detail there. So you need to add enough sample lines so that you pick up every significant change in your design, in your model. All right, created already in my corridor is a corridor surface, and I have that corridor surface in here because it's been XREF from my corridor drawing. So as most of you know, with sample lines, they have the unique ability to reference data that's been X-referenced. Virtually every other type of Civil 3D object, it needs the data shortcut of that object in here. Sample lines are the exception to it. So I didn't actually have to data reference my datum surface in or my existing surface. It all came through the XREF. So if I pick my sample line, I've got compute materials up here. It says select sample line group. There's my alignment. I'm going to select my Earthwork sample line group. I'll hit OK. And I get compute materials. Now this is stuff that's been defined in here based on some takeoff criteria styles. These are basically like a style. It's saved in the template. And in here is a definition of all these different materials and quantities that you guys need to calculate. And a lot of them are based on some of the same things. So you have, right off the bat, we have this map objects with the same name. And what it'll do is it'll map existing surface to the existing property. And I'll show you what this looks like in the sample line group after we've done this. And so right now we're just after some cuts and fills based on existing ground in the bottom of my road section, my datum surface. And click here to set all and grab my datum surface. Okay, now there's a lot of materials defined in here. You may not necessarily have these in your corridor model, but they are they're available in this criteria set. So at this point, we're just going to hit OK, and we've computed materials. Now, what did that actually do? If I open up sample line group properties, what that automated for us on the material list tab is the creation of a material list. You can click in here and you can rename it. And what it made was a cut quantity and an embankment quantity. And all it simply did, this was programmed into that criteria, is to define what cut common is. And so what cut common is all volumes below the existing surface and above the datum surface. And what is embankment? Well, it's the opposite of that. It's fill. So it's going to quantify those areas at every sample line, and then we can spit out a report. There's a number of different report options available. I'll show you a couple of them so you can see what it does. Well, let's go and hit OK here. Then we want to go to the Analyze tab. And if you've defined your materials in that way, we can run a volume report. And this is just a standard volume report that comes with this. We've got alignment. Again, we got to be careful of the sample line group. If I were to select cross sections, what do I get? I don't even have a material list. I didn't define materials in that sample line group. That's just strictly for cross sections. If I go to Earthwork, Then I have that earthwork material list. Then I have a style sheet in here. I can click this and I'll browse out, and I'll grab an XSL file and I'll grab the earthwork file. Now this sends out a fairly simple file that you can grab the data, you can throw it into Excel. If I just run OK on this, it opens up a browser and I get a volume report based on just the stuff I've set up at this point. So it's per station, it's cut volumes, fill volumes. And this is basically a table. You can take it and you can copy and paste it into Excel. Let's do a few more quantities in there. If I pick on my sample lines again, I can go to Compute Materials again. Again, it prompts me, what's my alignment, what's my sample line group. I go to Earthwork. And then the second time around, it launches me right into this window. We'd seen this before where it defined what embankment and what cut was. And I can start to add more quantities. Now these quantities right here, these are based on surfaces where I compared one surface to another. But we can pull other materials out of our corridor. Let's add a new material. Call this asphalt. Okay. What we can reference here are not surfaces, but we can reference corridor shapes. So those are one of those three components in our assemblies. And we had the points. That's what we're using to get point labeling in our sections. There's links. Those are the lines that in our cross sections. That was the color of the line, and then we saw like 4-to-1 labels on there, and so forth. Well, the shape is an area in your section. So if you take an area in a section and you extrude it across a length, then you get a volume, right? So we can take corridor shapes and be sampling that at our sample line intervals, and we'll pull material volumes out of our corridor. So we're not comparing one surface to the next, but we're just referencing a shape. And there's one kind of key confusing part to this, asphalt. You have to look at the quantity type. So like right now, if I go to corridor shape and I say, well, asphalt, that's my pavement in my corridor. It's going to say the corridor shape can't be added to, or can only be added to structure type. You got to set it to structures. Pretend that it says corridor shape. So it should say corridor shape, but the structures are corridor shapes. If it's a structure, then we can add that shape code to it. So that's what I'm referencing here. I'm referencing shape codes. We were referencing point codes before, crown, and then that one where we did the unique label at the center of the roadway. But here I'm referencing a shape code. And I can make a few more materials as well. A base material. Got to set it to structures, and I can reference my base codes in here. And if you have multiple, I think there's multiple in the sub-assemblies I was using. If you want to quantify it together, you can reference multiple shape codes in there. And reference my sub-base material. And I think on, did I miss one of these pave? Yeah, if I want to throw the, quantify it all together, the shoulder pavement, that can be thrown into here as well. If you want to separate it, make a different material for it. I hit OK. Okay, we don't see anything visual, but all those quantities are calculated in there. And so if I go run a report again, I can see that. So let's run a volume report again. And again, I'll go to my earthwork, grab our earthwork material list. In the style sheet, this time I'm going to do select material. I'm going to hit OK and run this report. And I get asphalt base, all the materials that I defined in there, including the cut and the embankment. So I'm running these quantities and all these numbers spit out, right? And some of us might look at it and just say, well, I don't know, I can't trust that, right? So how do you trust these quantities? You have to know what Civil 3D is doing and what it's thinking to start with. We have to understand how the sample lines are calculated. It's through average end area method. We have to understand the limitations of that and the advantages of it. So we have to know how it's reading our data. But more importantly, we have to know what data we're creating. So when you make a datum surface, you need to make sure that thing looks correctly. So when you're looks correct. So when you're in working with your corridor, take advantage of section editor. Look at your datum surface and section view so you can verify that it's running at the bottom of your section all the time. Turn it on in your section views themselves so you can verify that it looks correct there. Okay. If we put garbage into the sample lines, we're going to get garbage out. So it starts at the source. Make sure your assemblies to start with have the right depths, that they're building correctly, that you have the right targets assigned there. Your surfaces that come out of your corridors then will be almost there. You'll make a refinement surfaces, clean those up some. Once that surface is trustable and you have confidence in it, then we can trust the material quantities here. But know that all these do is calculate based on the data you're giving them. So if we didn't add enough sample lines in here, we're gonna miss the proper amount of quantities in the intersection area. So there's a number of other report options that are available, some more detailed stuff. There's nice Excel templates that are set up that aid in this. The main thing I wanted to show is how do you compute this stuff? How do you calculate it in here? And how do you know what it's doing, how it's calculating it? Once you can trust that data, there's a lot of report options there for how to use that. So that just about wraps up what I wanted to talk about. Just a couple conclusions, a couple points I'd like to make. And I said this a number of times during the presentation. When it comes to cross sections, when it comes to almost anything you're doing in Civil 3D, you want to focus on the source. Change things not in the byproduct, but in the source level. So why do we do things like make an alignment for our right-of-way? It's so that we have a single source for it. It's sitting in alignments drawing, and we can reference that to any number of drawings. If I copy a polyline all over the place, and I've got multiple sources, okay? That's not what Civil 3D is about. Civil 3D is about single source as much as possible, and then all these drawings and objects kind of link and talk together. So when it comes to corridors and sections, that means fix your corridors and your surfaces, or your assemblies and your sub-assemblies. We had done some of that with the label editing. Don't go to the sections. I know that's what you have to deliver. That's the sheet that you have to deliver, but those are just an output, right? Those are an output of your 3D model. So try always to focus on the source and start there with it. And this really applies to cross-section labeling. It's easy to get bogged down with it and want to do kind of section by section editing. Always think global first. Can I make a change to the source data? This ultimate source are the sub-assemblies. Can I make a change there that'll affect this labeling, that'll affect this quantification, that'll affect the appearance of the cross-sections? If you can do it there, do it there. But then obviously there's situations where you have to kind of go section by section or even label by label. And when it comes to quantities, what's key is you don't just dump a bunch of sample lines on there and hit the compute materials. It'll give you numbers, but you got to make sure they're right. You have to know what it's calculating. You have to understand average end area method. I think most of us do. You have to understand the limitations of that. So with that, I think I'll wrap up. Thank you all for watching. My contact information is up here. Feel free to contact me any questions about this presentation. Or just anything about Civil 3D, really. It's kind of what I do for a living, supporting WISDOT and consultants like you guys out there. So thanks again for tuning in, and have a good day.
Hey, Brian, we did have one question come
Sure.
through the webinar chat.
Sure.
if you turn a label visibility to false, you know, right click, turn it to false, is there a way to get that label to show again, or is it kind of lost in the space?
Is it lost in space and you're destined to put an M-text label there? No, you're not. It's not lost. If I pick this and I right click, I have label properties, and we go to label visibility false, it disappears, right? But if I pick this again, I'm going to say it's in corridor section properties, reset labels on the codes tab. So kind of hidden, it's kind of buried. Go to reset labels, and that will come back. So obviously we don't want that to come back, but if you inadvertently turn something off, or you were just kind of making a mess of things, and you don't remember what you turned off, go reset them. Where's my starting place? And you'll get back to where you were. So yeah, great question. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Thanks, everyone.